We're going to make 3 here. We're going to use some of this foam from the Dollar Tree, just the long pieces that are all attached, not the ones that are cut up. I draw a little square on the top, and using like my little putty knife from the Dollar Tree, I'm going to just go ahead and shave that off at a diagonal like that. What I want to do is change these little foam blocks into buoys. I wanted to make like 3 different like patriotic buoys that I can use for decorating. And I thought this would be way easier than making them out of wood. So I did that on all 4 sides of my little square, just shaving that down, trying to get that like fairly even. It's not going to be perfect, but you can get it pretty close. And then you can also sand that foam. This is that real soft foam from the Dollar Tree. I was trying to square up like the bottom corners there a little bit. But again, if you want it to look like an old buoy, like the less perfect it is, probably the better. And that's pretty much going to be the shape of this. But again, I wanted to do 3 of these. So we're going to go ahead and have 2 more to cut down as well. I was thinking they're going to need a hole. So I just use a dowel from the Dollar Tree and push it through the foam and create a hole there. Super easy. Again, the foam is going to be just way more easier because I know you can make these out of wood, but that would be a lot of cutting and with a saw. So first buoy is done. So I want to do the same thing with the other 2 by making a square on the top. This one, I think I made my square a little bit larger on this one to try to give myself a little bit of room in case I needed to trim it up a little bit. But again, just shaving down, trying to get like the 4 sides like relatively even. Again, it's not going to be perfect, but you definitely can clean it up a little bit with a sanding sponge from the Dollar Tree. And again, I'm just going to poke a hole through there for our rope. And 1 more buoy. I'm going to paint these like kind of like traditional buoys. I'm going to do them all different though, so they'll all kind of coordinate together. And, but also I'm going to give them like a slight patriotic feel using some patriotic colors and numbers and stuff like that. So just shaved down the 3rd one exactly the same way and gave it a quick sand. Now, I was worried that if I just tried to paint like directly on that foam, it wasn't going to stick. So I do go over it with a big coat of Mod Podge first because I wanted to try to seal that that foam, has that kind of like flaky feel. I kind of wanted to, seal that so I would kind of have a surface to paint. And so that's what I'm using. It's just Mod Podge, just kind of going all over with a foam brush to try to seal that. And I think that did do the job because I was able to paint them. I did have some issues painting them because it was still very kind of like delicate to work with at this point. One thing that's great about making a foam buoy though is that it's going to be very lightweight, so it's going to be really easy to hang. And I think these would kind of hold up inside, outdoors, wherever you want to use them. So I'm just using that Mod Podge on all 3 and we're just sealing all over the sides. I'm using the matte Mod Podge, but you could totally use whatever you have. And I was thinking, I would like to do like some buoys, like the round ball buoys, but I've never really found anything at the Dollar Tree. Like they don't have like foam balls that big. And I think like playground balls really wouldn't work for that. So I've been trying to brainstorm something I could do, like so I could make like a chain of the round ones. That would be really cool to do as well. So just sealing up the 3rd one, and then we can get started painting these little buoys. I also sealed the bottom, kind of all of the surfaces. Now, I'm going to use chalk paint. I thought that might stick better. I don't know if it really matters, though. But what we're going to do is go over the buoys, and I'm going to go ahead and paint them all ivory. So I just kind of start out a couple sides at a time so that that can start drying. And since I have 3 of them, I can kind of alternate which one that we're painting. So I do 2 sides, I do the top and the bottom, and then I move on to the next one to kind of make it just more efficient. I want to use like the same colors that we used on our flag. So I want to use red, white, and blue, but for blue, I want to use kind of like a coastal beachy blue. So once it gets dry, I go ahead and paint the other 2 sides, and it gives you that cool like texture where you can see kind of some of the holes there in the foam. That's just going to make it look more realistic, more like an old buoy. And I do go over it with a second coat of ivory just to make sure I'm covering up like all of that light green foam to make them look a little bit better. So once they're all ivory, we can start taping them off. Now, my mistake was probably that I used painter's tape that was a little too good. This is some really good painter's tape, and because what it did is it does take some of the paint off. So be careful if you're using painter's tape. I use this because it's really sticky, but maybe I should have used some of the Dollar Tree painter's tape. Might be less sticky. But for this one, I wanted to do stripes, like the flag stripes, right? So I am just pinching that on the corners, trying to get straight lines all the way across so that I can cover up the white stripes, and then we can go in and paint like red stripes on this buoy. And they don't have to be perfect, just similar. So that's our first one. Now this one, I thought we would do something a little different. So about like halfway down, I'm just going to tape across. So we can kind of like color block this one a little bit. And then I decided to add stripes to the bottom of it, but just like one right there in the middle. Now this one, I definitely want to color block this one. So kind of like 2/3 of the way down, I'm putting a stripe on this one of the painter's tape, and you'll see what I mean by color blocking these. Now I'm going in with that crimson red chalk paint again, and we are going to go paint stripes. So just going over the buoy on all the sides, we're just going to paint over the painter's tape and give some stripes to these buoys. So the first one is the one with all of the stripes. Now, the next one I kind of wanted to do a little bit different. I decided I wanted to do a red top on this buoy. So I'm just painting the top of this one red and stopping at the painter's tape. Then I wanted it to have like a white stripe and then another red stripe, which is why I taped it off like that. And then leave the bottom part of it that ivory color. And for the last one, we wanted just a simple color block. So I did the top of the last one, so we'll do the bottom of this one, like in the bright red. Just by painting the bottom and all 4 sides underneath the tape. And again, I do want to do these red, white, and blue. They're probably going to have a little bit more red on them than blue, but that's okay. That's kind of how a flag is, right? So that looks pretty good. And we can start painting like the blue part of the buoys. This one I wanted to do color block, so we're going to do the entire top of this buoy in that like light blue agave color of chalk paint. Again, definitely I use chalk paint on these, but I don't know if it's really necessary. You can probably get away with acrylic paint on these. I was just trying to paint with something that was going to be a little stickier to stick to that foam. And then we paint the bottom of this one blue. And that first one is just red and white, so no blue on that one. And I think that's going to work. So I gave them a good dry, but I was careful. I did not want to melt the foam. And then this is kind of when I had some issues with this project because as you can see, it started out kind of good, but like right here, like the tape started taking off the paint. And even though it was a really sticky, like painter's tape, it did bleed too. So I'm going to go ahead and take off all of the paint to painter's tape. and see what kind of damage we have. Now, you could kind of leave the damage because it does make them look older and more realistic like a buoy, but mine are pretty rough at this point. So I do go in and we're just going to try touching these up a little bit by touching up like our white stripes. Anywhere where you could see like some of the green foam through them. And try to cover up a little bit of the bleeding as well. Again, I wasn't going for perfect, but I did want it to look like it had a little bit of a pattern. So if you're going to use painter's way tape, be careful. Definitely don't do what I did. Okay, so I wanted to put a 4 on there, so I just kind of used like a bigger brush to kind of paint a 4 on there. I got it on there and wasn't a huge fan of how it looked, so I did flip it over and try to paint another little 4 on there that I liked a little bit better, a little bit finer. But the 4 is for the 4th of July. That's basically going to be any of the text on there. But you could add more numbers. You could do like a 7-2 for July, right? Now that I have them all painted the colors that I want, I am going in and distressing them with ivory. So, you know, that is going to help disguise any of the paint issues that we might have had. But it's also going to give them that like rustic feel that we definitely want them to have. So I just go around like all the edges, and I'm just using like a chunky brush from the Dollar Tree and a little bit of ivory for that. And even though we had some issues painting these, I think they turned out really cool and I absolutely love them. Now to hang them, I'm just going to use some of that thinner brown nautical rope from the Dollar Tree and string them in that hole we made earlier. Just going to try to make sure I get it large enough that my rope will fit through there. You can also kind of use the dowel to help push your rope through there, kind of feeding it through a little bit. Just a matter of getting your hole large enough there. And then I'm just going to cut off a piece of that rope long enough to make a nice hanger and tie that off. I am going ahead and stringing them on the same rope, but I am going to cut it into like individual pieces. As you'll see, wasn't sure if I wanted to tie them all up together or if I wanted them hanging separately with the rope. And I did decide that I did want them hanging separately with the rope. But for now, I'm just stringing them through there. Just making sure that I got the hole large enough. And aren't these fun? Now you could paint these in any kind of colors, but this is just a nautical or coastal version that's also a little bit patriotic. So I cut one off that's long enough, and then I just kind of do an overhead knot there on the top to make a hanger and pull that tight. And I think that looks really cool. Now I hang mine, but you could also sit them on a counter with the ropes kind of hanging down like that. I think these would look really cute hanging outside, like along a fence or something like that too. That would be really cute. And so I do the same thing on all 3 of them, is just I tie them in a knot and cut off the excess rope.
And you could use this for really any time for coastal decor, but doing it red, white, and blue like this makes it really fun for the 4th of July and great for coastal patriotic decor. I just love how these turned out. They were really easy. You could make as many of them as you want, and you can do whatever kind of patterns on them as well. Just a little bit of a learning curve with painting them, I learned, but I kind of like how they all turned out really rustic like that.